We had met only a few weeks after I had started my first job after graduating from college. I had found no difficulty in getting my first real position after a number of experience-type jobs, and I was very grateful for all of the people who had insisted I continue on with my studies so that I would have a much better run through life. I, of course, didn't believe them, but for some reason, I persisted where necessary and then found myself graduating with honors. I had made it big time. Stephanie worked as an assistant in an exclusive frock salon which served the rich and famous. She had been there for 2 years and had settled in very well. She loved the work and the people she met. I had met up with Stephanie quite by accident. She had decided to eat her lunch at a local cafe which was not far from her work. She was sitting at a table with one of her friends when the friend turned to me, sitting at the next table, and asked me if I would pass them the sugar for their coffee. Of course, I obliged and received a beaming smile of thanks from both of the girls. Not long after I had passed the sugar, I realized I needed some for my own coffee. When I stood up and came over to their table, I could have just reached over and grabbed it myself, but didn't, and began to ask for the sugar, and Stephanie, in a playful mood, told me they didn't have any sugar and promptly hid the container in her lap. This provoked a bit of a laugh, and then Stephanie produced the sugar, apologized for their silly fun, and invited me to join them. I couldn't resist. After the introductions and a little idle chatter about where I and they worked, and more silly questions about what we liked in TV and live shows, the girls decided it was time for them to return to their respective work. They thanked me for talking to them and left. I couldn't help but watch them go with just a little flutter in my heart. I had really enjoyed their company, even for such a short time. As I stood up to return to my work, I noticed a small plastic carry bag which Stephanie had been looking into while we had been talking. I realized she had left it under the table. Luckily, I remembered where she was employed, and with a few minutes left before I was due to return to my work, I was able to hurry to her shop. She was surprised to see me, to say the least. She was even more surprised when I asked her if she had left the carry bag under the table. She was quite shocked to think she had been that silly and thanked me profusely. She said she must have been distracted because she rarely did silly things like that. After returning the bag to her, I turned to go back to my work. Stephanie called me back and thanked me once again and asked me if she could buy me a drink after work to thank me. Of course I accepted, and we agreed on a local bar. All through the afternoon, I kept thinking of Stephanie and her friend. Whilst her friend had initially attracted me more, I soon realized it was Stephanie whom I was more interested in. The afternoon couldn't pass quickly enough. As soon as I could, I headed for the bar and waited to see if Stephanie would come. It wouldn't have been the first time I had been stood up if she didn't turn up. I didn't have very long to wait before this lovely girl came rushing into the bar area. She greeted me with a very friendly smile and told me she had been hurrying so she wouldn't keep me waiting. We ordered our drinks and then found a table which was away from the bar and in a nice quiet area. Our talk was very friendly and the time passed very quickly. Stephanie was particularly pleased I had found her parcel because it contained some special accessories for one of her customers, and she would have been in terrible trouble if she had lost it. It made me very happy to hear I had been of help to her. After a second and later a third round of drinks, I glanced at my watch to find the time had really slipped by and it was time to eat. I asked Stephanie if she would care to join me in a meal, and she accepted very quickly. I gathered Stephanie was a bit keen on me, and I had to admit I was very keen on her. We moved to a nearby steakhouse and enjoyed our meal. We were very friendly by the time we had finished our meal, and when I asked Stephanie where she lived, she told me she had a flat nearby. I offered to walk her home, and she accepted readily. She hastened to tell me she had a flatmate and she would be at home. I guess this was to tell me she wasn't available that night. Anyway, we walked the 5 blocks and hardly noticed the distance at all. About halfway along the journey, Stephanie slipped her hand into mine, and we held hands for the rest of the way. When we reached the front of her building, she turned to me and told me what a wonderful evening it had been. She moved towards me, gave me a hug, and when I leaned over to kiss her, she didn't move back. It was only a light kiss on the lips, but I suddenly felt $1 million. We said goodnight after that, and after seeing her safely through her front door, I hailed a taxi for the short journey home to my place. I lived in a flat by myself, which was about 5 miles from Stephanie's flat. During the dinner, she had written out her telephone numbers, both work and home, and told me to ring her soon. I decided it would be a good idea to wait for a couple of days before ringing her. Firstly, to keep her waiting to show I wasn't rushing all over her. Secondly, it might just make her all the more anxious to see me again if she had a little time to think about me, assuming it would be all good. It took a lot of willpower to wait 2 more days, and then I bucked up enough courage and dialed Stephanie's work number. I reasoned she wouldn't be able to talk for very long, and I might have a better chance of her accepting another dinner invitation if she didn't have very long to think about it. As soon as she answered the phone, the level of excitement rose in her voice, and I could tell it was genuine. We very quickly arranged to meet again that evening, but a little later than before, as Stephanie wanted to go home to her flat to change, because she said it was a special occasion, and she wanted to look her best. I thought about this and decided I would catch a taxi home and also shower and clean up, as I wanted to make an impression on Stephanie. We met at the appointed restaurant. I arrived about 1 minute before Stephanie. She looked really wonderful. She had obviously taken a deal of trouble in making herself look attractive, and she had succeeded with the final result. She looked great. She was dressed in a black cocktail dress, which was quite short, well above her knees, and the top was slightly low-cut and held up with 2 spaghetti straps. She had slightly high-heeled shoes on which made her legs look lovely, and she had been to a hairdresser and had her hair done. She looked really pretty. I wondered why she had gone to so much trouble. I must say I looked quite smart too, as I had changed into a very casual lounge suit, and this made me feel good. We made a good pair. We were escorted to our table, nice and secluded, in the dining area, and we glanced at the menus which the waiter had handed to us. We were really only skimming over the menus because we were sneaking furtive glances at one another over and around the menus, just like a couple of kids. I told her how pretty she looked, and I am sure she blushed. It was obvious she had gone to a deal of bother to look pretty for the date. We ordered, then chatted away while waiting for the meals to arrive. I discovered during the meal Stephanie had been in the city for only 1 year, having lived the rest of her 24 years in the country. She had a delightful simplicity about her, which I particularly liked. She hadn't had a real boyfriend, although lots of boys had asked her out. She said she was rather shy and didn't want to accept any invitation from any boy if she didn't really like him. She said she didn't want to go out with anyone unless she would be happy to spend her life with him. It suddenly occurred to me she had obviously accepted me as someone she would want to spend the rest of her life with. I had dated lots of girls before, but had never been very serious with them, and although I had done a bit of petting with them, nothing very sexual had eventuated. I gathered she must be a virgin, and of course, I was too. I suppose I began to wonder if it was possible for 2 people aged 25 and 26 to still be virgins in this day and age. We chatted without pause, and suddenly we realized it was time to close the restaurant. Time had really slipped by because we seemed to be so interested in each other. I figured it would be a good time to ask for another date, and almost before I had asked her, she had accepted. I realized things were starting to happen between Stephanie and myself. We were still within walking distance of her flat, and again, we agreed to walk. This time, she had my hand in hers before we had gone 5 steps, and before long, I had my arm around her waist. I began to love this beautiful girl. Tonight, she asked me to come up to her flat with her, but just to meet her flatmate. When we entered the flat, her flatmate, Dell, was sitting up watching television. It became obvious she had been waiting for Stephanie to return home. I guess this was inspection time to see if I would pass. Dell greeted me in a very friendly way, and we got along very well. Stephanie asked me if I would like a coffee, and when I accepted, she moved into the kitchen to get it ready. Dell took the opportunity to talk to me, and it was plain she cared a lot about Stephanie and wanted to make sure my intentions were honorable. I guess I had no difficulty convincing Dell, and she seemed to accept me without reservation. While Stephanie was out of hearing, Dell asked me for my work telephone number. She wanted to ring me tomorrow and talk to me about Stephanie. I thought this was a bit odd, but quietly wrote my number on a card and handed it to her. We 3 chatted on for about an hour, and soon it was almost 1 a.m. I made my apologies and told them I must return home and get my beauty sleep, otherwise I wouldn't be able to work the next day. Although they laughed at me, they agreed it was late, and Dell moved into her bedroom, and Stephanie moved over to me to give me a goodnight kiss before I left. She told me how much she had enjoyed the evening and looked forward to the next occasion. I had been smart enough to make the next date 3 days. Hence, this would give us a bit of breathing space and a chance to get a little keen about the date. After several kisses, Stephanie said goodnight, and away I went. Home to a deep dreaming sleep, dreaming about Stephanie. The next day, Dell rang me at work, She asked if I would be able to talk to her, and I explained I had my own office and wouldn't be disturbed. She immediately asked me if I was serious about Stephanie. She simply said, "Stephanie is too good a girl to be stuffed about by some idiot who doesn't really care about her. I will do everything in my power to look after Stephanie, and this includes making sure you are on the level and not out just for a quick screw." This sudden outburst startled me, as I hadn't thought Dell would talk to me that way. I soon realized Dell was deadly serious and really thought a lot of Stephanie. I told her just how much I cared about Stephanie, and I was only interested in a long-term relationship if Stephanie felt the same way about me. She told me Stephanie was head over heel in love with me. I became quite excited about this and told Dell I felt the same way. I thanked her for her concern about Stephanie and assured her I would only treat Stephanie with the greatest respect. I felt she was the one for me, but it would take the two of us to tangle. Dell accepted this and wished me well. It appeared she had known Stephanie since kindergarten, and they had looked out for each other since then. The only other thing Dell said was, she had been surprised I hadn't tried to sleep with Stephanie last night because it was so late. I simply told her I wasn't that sort of a person and was prepared to wait for the right time. She told me I had done the right thing. The next 6 dates went wonderfully, and we could both see a true love blossoming between us. It was on this last date that we really committed ourselves to one another and agreed we would be together for a long-term relationship. It would be simple to say we continued to see each other on very regular occasions, and the relationship became deeper, but we still resisted making love together, as Stephanie had told me she wanted to wait, at least for the time being. After 6 months of continually meeting and talking and doing a little bit of petting, I proposed marriage to Stephanie, and without any hesitation, she accepted. We set the marriage date for 6 months. In the next 6 months, Stephanie took me home to meet her parents and the rest of her family. She had a wonderful family, and I was really made welcome in their homes and accepted as one of the family. Stephanie was thrilled at how well I had been accepted, and this deepened our love. I also took Stephanie to meet my family, and they accepted her just as well. I guess we had ideal families, and it looked as though we were set for the wedding. The wedding wasn't a huge one, just our families and a few friends. And as soon as the ceremony was over, we moved to the reception and enjoyed a great meal with everyone. During the reception, Dell, who was Stephanie's bridesmaid, pulled me to one side and told me how excited she was at the way I had treated Stephanie. She told me she thought maybe at the beginning of the relationship I was just a go-getter and was out to just make use of Stephanie. She gave me a great hug and told me she loved me for what I was doing with Stephanie. It was obvious they were very close, and although Dell wasn't happy I was coming between them, she accepted me, and that was that. Our first night was wonderful. We found our two bodies and explored every part of each other. We made love, and, apart from the initial pain when I popped her cherry, we found it was worth waiting for. We went on a honeymoon, and although we went to a number of resorts during our travels, we didn't see much of the sights as we were too busy making love with each other. This was real love. On our return from the honeymoon, we moved into my flat on a temporary basis until we found another more neutral place to stay. We wanted a place of our own, not one which one of us was familiar with. After a couple of weeks of hunting, we found a delightful place to live and began to settle down to married life. Sex was wonderful. We were both quite inexperienced to begin with, and we even bought a manual so we would be able to learn more about love and sex. This worked very well. We were still very good friends with Dell, and although she missed Stephanie a great deal, she always kept that to herself. Our home wasn't very far from Dell's flat, and we saw a deal of her. It wasn't a great surprise when one day, Dell told us she had found herself a man and she was in love. We were very happy for Dell. Our first 2 years went wonderfully well. Stephanie and I still worked at the same places and everything was going along smoothly. Stephanie was now managing not only the shop she had been working in, but we had bought another similar business in another suburb, not far from where we lived, and now we had a fashion shop of our own. The purchase had been with the blessing of the owner of the store where Stephanie had worked, and she even helped us select the store we wanted. Stephanie was working at 2 jobs, but doing them very well. She had a young and very talented girl working in our shop, and she was doing a very good job. Suddenly, trouble reared its head. Stephanie and I were lying in bed, and after making love, Stephanie leaned up on one elbow, looked me right in the eyes, and said, "Darling, I would like to make love to another man." I couldn't have been more stunned if she had hit me with a hammer. What on earth had made Stephanie say that? When I attempted questioning her about why she would want to make love to another man, she simply told me the girl who was managing our store had been talking to her and had been telling her how wonderful it was to make love to different men. Colleen had told Stephanie she didn't know what she was missing out on, and she should at least try it with at least one other person because she would soon know what was missing. I couldn't believe what Stephanie was saying. Why was she taking any notice of Colleen? What could she possibly think would be different? Now I had to quickly think how I could stop this silly talk. Over the next month, Stephanie kept on and on about wanting to make love to another man. Nothing I could say to her seemed to have much effect on her. I decided to visit Colleen at the shop in the hope I would be able to change her mind and get her to convince Stephanie it wasn't a good idea. When I met Colleen, she was quite angry with me for questioning what she had been telling Stephanie. She told me, in no uncertain way, how much she enjoyed sleeping with different men and how each one was different from the other. She didn't want Stephanie to leave me just to try ducking another man to see the difference. I couldn't understand her logic and told her so, but it didn't do much good. We parted on even terms, but she could see I was furious with her and wanted her to stop talking to Stephanie about this nonsense. It didn't do any good. Stephanie kept on at me asking me if I was so insecure about her that I would think she might not return to me. Although I told her this was not the case, I couldn't convince her about the perils of adultery and what else could go wrong. I told her about disease and other problems, but it did very little to convince her. She still wanted to try another man. Colleen had done a good job of changing her thinking and nothing I tried seemed to work. I rang Dell and explained to her what was going on. She was shocked and hardly believed me. She told me she would meet with Stephanie as soon as possible and change her mind. Dell told me Stephanie was an idiot to be thinking like she was. I had an anxious time waiting for Stephanie to return from talking with Dell. When she came in, she was quite flushed and told me she had had a fight with Dell and then had ended up exchanging very unpleasant words. She told me I was a low creature for telling Dell what she wanted to do, and now everyone would know what she wanted to do. I couldn't understand her logic. If she didn't want anyone to know what she was doing, why on earth was she doing it anyway? I think the heated words with Dell had made her all the stronger in her resolve, and she told me she was making preparations to go ahead and try another man. And that was that. It was now final. I had failed. 2 more weeks went by, and I was anxiously watching Stephanie to see if there were any signs she was planning to go ahead with her idea. We were still making love almost every night and sometimes during the day on weekends, but this still didn't seem as if it would change her mind. I loved Stephanie just as much as I had before we married, but I wasn't sure how I would handle it if she actually slept with another man. Maybe this would be the end of us. I hoped not, but I couldn't get my head around the thought of her with another man. The dreaded conversation began on a Thursday evening after she had come home from her work. She began to prepare our evening meal when she suddenly stopped and simply said, "I have invited a man to come here to our house tomorrow evening, so he can fuck me. I am giving you notice so you can either choose to watch or you can go out, and I can tell you about it after. I have made up my mind, and nothing you can say will change my mind." I was shattered. I had thought if she was going to go ahead with the silly idea, she would at least go to a motel or something like that, rather than have someone come to our own home. How could she do this? Incredibly, she continued preparing our meal, and we ate it together in silence, although she did chatter quite a bit about everything except the next night. I couldn't find anything to say. I just remained quiet and didn't enjoy my meal at all. After we had cleared everything away and settled down to watch television for a while, she sat next to me on the couch, placed her head on my shoulder, told me she loved me, and hoped I would be able to understand what she was doing and accept it. What a chance. She waited until the program was finished and then took me by the hand and pulled me to the bedroom where we undressed ready for bed. After we had visited that bathroom and were ready to jump into bed, Stephanie moved over to me, told me she loved me, and wanted me to make love to her now. I asked her how she expected me to feel, seeing she was going ahead with her plan to sleep with another man on the next night. She told me it was a learning experience for her and she loved me. Again, I asked her to reconsider her thinking, but she told me she was going ahead with her plan no matter what I thought about it. That was that. I couldn't sleep at all. I spent the night tossing and turning, wondering just what would happen next night. In the morning, I again asked Stephanie to reconsider, but again she refused. She told me she had arranged to leave the shop early and would come home and prepare herself for the man. She asked me if I wanted to watch her with the man or go out. I had tried to think about this all night and couldn't make up my mind. I didn't want to leave her with some man I didn't know, but could I watch her with another man? I still wasn't sure. I asked her what she thought, and she said, "Of course, I would want you to watch me duck another man. I would much rather you be there and see me than to not know what was going on. After all, I love you and want you forever." I guess the die was cast. I would be watching my darling wife with another man. For the first time, I asked her who the man would be. She simply said, "His name is Will, and I made contact with him through Colleen. She says he has been her best lover, but now she has found many other men who were just as good." I tried to work during the day, but my constant thoughts were of Stephanie and how I could possibly stop her from this foolishness. Early in the afternoon, I rang the showroom, but was told she had left earlier. This means she must be at home already making preparations for tonight. I couldn't concentrate, and so I told the staff I was taking an early break and would see them next week. I headed for home immediately. When I opened the front door of our place, I couldn't see Stephanie and wondered if she was really at home. When I wandered towards the bathroom, Stephanie opened the door and, having just stepped out of the shower, was standing in front of me. She asked me how she looked. I have always felt strongly that Stephanie has the most beautiful body, and so I told her so. Stephanie is tall and beautifully proportioned for her height. It is obvious I am totally in love with my Stephanie, but now I am having great doubts about what I will think tomorrow. I again pleaded with Stephanie not to go ahead with this stupid idea, but no matter what I said, she simply told me she was going ahead with it no matter what. What a change, Stephanie. I just cannot understand why this change has been so dramatic. I again pleaded with Stephanie to forget the whole idea, but she said her mind was made up. She was dressed in a nice black mini dress, which resembled the very first dress she had worn when on our first date. I asked Stephanie if she realized I would probably leave her if she went ahead with her silly idea, but she said she didn't think I would be that silly. Well, I would show her. At precisely 7 p.m., the doorbell rang, and it was easy to see Stephanie was becoming very excited, and I could see a slight twitch in her face as she turned to look at me. She opened the door, and in stepped a 6-foot man, handsome and well-presented, but a big man just the same. They nervously introduced each other and shook hands. I thought that was an absolute irony to think they would introduce themselves by shaking hands, and then go ahead and duck each other. Stephanie tried to introduce Will to me, and out of politeness only, I nodded to him, but then told him in no uncertain manner that I thought what he was doing was totally wrong, and he should leave immediately. I left the bedroom and moved to the junk room where we kept anything of value, but not wanted at the moment. I retrieved 2 suitcases from the mess and returned to the bedroom. Placing the suitcases on the floor alongside the bed, I began pulling my clothes, underwear, socks, shirts, etc. from the wardrobes and placing them in the suitcases. Fortunately for me, we didn't have a great deal of material things, and so I was able to gather all of my stuff quickly. This included a few books, CDs, and things like that, and I quickly shoved them into the remaining case space. When I had packed, I simply said to Stephanie, "Well, I never thought it would ever come to this, but you have disgraced me in our marriage. I hope, for your sake, you will be at peace with what you have done. Our marriage is now over. I will see my lawyer and apply for a divorce. You can do what you like from now on. If you want to stay in the house, you can pay the rent. It is now over for me." For the first time, I actually saw concern on Stephanie's face, and she said, "Darling, this is only an experiment. There is nothing between Will and me. Surely you can't begrudge me that." As I picked up the 2 suitcases, I said to Stephanie, "From the first time I met you, right up until yesterday, I have loved you like no one else could ever do, but you have betrayed me in a manner which I cannot understand. We are now finished, and that is that. I don't ever want to see you again." With that said, I stamped out of the bedroom and moved out of the house and her life. I didn't have any bother finding a motel for the night. In fact, I booked for a week. I began unpacking my suitcases and set up the motel room as my home for a week at least. Perhaps it wouldn't be so bad after all. Now I had to erase the image of Stephanie completely. There was no turning back. There were a number of motels in our city, and it would take Stephanie a long while to locate me if she ever did. On Monday morning, I went to work as usual. After about an hour of not working, simply trying to fathom out what I should do now, I called all of the staff into the general office. I made an announcement to them telling them I had split from Stephanie and from now on, I would appreciate it if there was no reference to Stephanie from anyone. I also instructed the receptionist not to put any call from Stephanie through to me. The staff was stunned by my announcement. They all knew how devoted we were to one another, and this was a complete surprise. It was very uncomfortable working in the office because the staff tended to avoid me, not because they didn't like me, but mainly, I guess because they were frightened to talk to me for fear they would mention Stephanie. I solved this problem after the third day by telling them all I was taking 3 weeks leave, and they wouldn't see me for that period. My closest associate came into my office and closed the door. He was probably the only one close enough to me to understand just what I was going through. He sat down and told me he was shocked by the events of the last couple of days, and he thought my idea of taking some leave was a good one. He also suggested I go on a holiday and move as far as possible from our city. He said he would keep in touch with me on my holiday to let me know if anything of importance needed to be attended to, but mainly, I should try to forget the past. As he was leaving, he turned back at the door and said quietly, "Julie, our receptionist, has taken over 40 calls from Stephanie since Monday morning. She has done a marvelous job of blocking her, but it is a big strain on her. I am sure she will be relieved when she can tell Stephanie truthfully you are not here." I was a bit surprised that Stephanie would try so hard to contact me, but it was of no use now. I contacted my lawyer and asked him to arrange for divorce papers to be served on Stephanie as soon as possible. I didn't give him any details except that it had to be done as quickly as possible. He said there was a waiting period and explained a few of the complications of divorce, but I simply told him to go ahead when he could. I left on my holiday the next day. I booked on a boat cruise for 2 weeks and managed to meet lots of interesting people, but didn't get involved with anyone. I couldn't trust myself to trust anybody now. I knew I would get over this in time, but this was not the right time. A full year down the track, the divorce does come through. Stephanie and I are no longer married. In the meantime, I have met a wonderful, understanding lady who is fully aware of my situation. She is in no hurry to do anything of a permanent nature, but she is a wonderful companion. When I make love to her, I can't help thinking of Stephanie. I have slowly learned to call up a mental image of Stephanie impaled by another man whilst I am making love, and this has the effect of removing Stephanie from my mind at the time. I have read lots of stories about men wanting their wife to be ducked by another man. I don't have any religious or anti-views, but I cannot understand how any man who really loves his wife would allow her to be ducked by another man and enjoy it. I can't erase Stephanie completely. I am just hoping time will be the great healer. Thank you for watching. Like, share, and subscribe to listen to more stories. Take care.